He is currently an associate professor at the Expone de Psicología de la Universidad Católica de Chile, and his research focuses on the intersection, I'm not sure that's the right, or the intertwining, between subjectivity and social life phenomena. He has studied memory, both from theoretical, conceptual perspectives, as well as collective memory related or relative to political events like the military coup in Chile in 1973, and experiences in diverse age groups. He has also investigated autobiographical memory and the role that particular ideological considerations play in historical memory, political attitudes, and social prejudice. The title of his talk today is Political Refugees, Social Identity, and Biographical Memory, a case study with Chileans in England living in exile. Okay.
Thank you, Maria Loreto. Well, I will talk in English, right? But I will be trying to translate main, like, difficult expressions, if there are any. Please ask whenever there's something you're not understanding, right? Porque de otro modo lo explico así en castellano y es muy simple. Well, as an abstract, let me just say that I will try to share with you some reflections that I have been working on very recently, actually during this year, out of any formal project, combining the experience and knowledge I have with three men living in England during the last almost 10 years. Of course, I have been visiting England like once every 2 years or so, not very permanent. Because when I met them, or two of them at least, I was doing my PhD in England, in Sheffield, where I met these people. And I was doing, so to say, more quantitative analysis of some aspects of political and collective memory regarding the military coup, especially in young generations who didn't experience this event directly. And it was only after finishing my thesis that I started working with these guys and other people within the Sheffield Chilean community. And through the years, my experience with them has been, I would say, a partner in my research in political psychology, and especially in collective memory, political memory, and ideology, which are topics that I worked out with some colleagues present here in this room. So what I will be presenting is a couple of reflections about something that has been a complement. It's complementary to what I've been doing in formal research till now, and it makes sense to me to present this today, because I think it opens up a new question, a new research question for me, and well, for some colleagues as well, as I know from before, that has to do specifically with the way in which social class is understood, not only theoretically defined, but also subjectively appropriated. And I will try to show, giving reference, only referring to 3 case studies, not going into detail, that social class is a very important reference in meaning making, especially in narrative practices, in the case of political refugees in Chile. And I will end up discussing or pointing at some discussion, possible discussions around the notion of social class in connection with social identity and memory. Right, first I will start by the notion of social identity, or social identities really as a phenomenon. And let me just frame this in a very wide perspective. Wide perspective because there are many theories, and I don't want to discuss here like the differences among theories about identities and about identification processes. I would like to stress some, I would say, common aspects of social identity theories. Probably the more well-known theories, Tashfield's social identity theory, which is consistent with what I will stress here. First, that social identities, even though in Tashfield theory has a very important cognitive aspect as a social category, like a knowledge, as a knowledge structure in mind, it also has an affective dimension. And I have been particularly interested in how, so to say, categories, groups, or different like identity reference are a way in which, or are objects to which people engage affectively in a way that many cognitive representations seem to be accidental. They could change. You can arrange representation in different ways according to the context. You can change the content of an identity through time, across time. But there is an affective link, I would say, that makes a subject makes the subject think herself in terms of a social reality, right? So I have been interested in this affective dimension, and also in something that I will come up later in the discussion, with the fact that social identities are not only aspects of social groups or related to social groups, also to social values. Sometimes we identify with a particular principle, particular evaluation criteria, or social values, even if they don't make up groups, like concrete groups. And that connects social identities with another concept different from the notion of identity, but the idea that people construct beliefs and protect their beliefs about their social categories in a way that can be described as ideological. They develop a particular discourse that is interested in terms of social values, and so that social identities are not only like a representation of a social membership, but also of a political project. And I'm stressing these aspects because in previous studies about ideology, and about social identities, I have found that in practice they are like mixed together. They work together. So my question has been, how do they work together, right? And to approach an answer to that, I am particularly in terms of methodological, as a methodological approach, I'm working with the notion of subjective positioning within a dialogical discourse analysis approach, right? And subjective positioning means that that people identify with a group or present themselves as a member of a group or as related to a particular social value as a way of being or producing a self. People like people do a work of self. They produce self by taking a position towards others, and in taking a position towards others, people usually employ social information about groups. In particular, social identity theories stress identities rather than differences. However, from a broad perspective, social identifications from most of these theories are a dynamic relationship between a complementary relationship between identities and differences. And this dialogic, so to say, approach I'm introducing has to do with the dynamic relationships of identities and differences in terms of how actions are always incorporating the voice of the other to whom I react or to whom I address my action. That will, at this point I will suggest a distinction theoretically, but then I will apply it. The other is not just one thing. First of all, there are concrete others to whom you are, for instance, having a conversation. But you're talking about other people when talking with this first other, so to say. So there are more concrete and more virtual others. But from another point of view, I think it's important to distinguish between two kinds of others. One, the one to whom you address your action or your utterance, to whom you're talking, to whom, or it's the other you would like to hear, the other that ideally would hear your utterance, right? So you are addressing it to these people or identity or group. But there is another one, or another aspect of otherness, that is that others not only are those to whom I address, but sometimes it's another to whom I don't address. I mean, I'm not addressing them, but I'm responding to. And in particular, I will show how this can be critically distinguished in these studies. To build up the problem I have in mind, basically, let me start by the main terms of this talk. Social identity first. I gave a brief introduction. Then biographical memory. Let me just go quick now because we can discuss this later. First, biographical memories, as I understand them, has to do not only with the psychological capacity to form representations of one's own past, but has to do also with an activity. So the memory is, in the first place, a kind of practice, and in particular, a narrative practice. A practice that has to do with linking events and identities in time according to meaningful relationships. Meaningful relationships in terms of human actions and reactions. That means that in biographical memory as a narrative practice, we are not just representing a past, but we're doing something, and we're doing something we're, at least we should expect to have effects. And so we can say that biographical memory has a performative effect, or a performative aspect of it, that has to do with the consequences for the self of investing an effort in building a narrative, a biographical narrative. That means that autobiographical memory is a narrower concept. So I prefer biographical memory because it has to do with self-relevant information, but not only self-focused, so to say. And it doesn't involve necessarily the effort of building a whole account of one's own life, but probably of some episodes or some aspects of it. And finally, memory, even if it is autobiographical, is never individual. It's made with others in several senses. First of all, we learn from others, different ways of remembering, but also we, so to say, use memories with collective relevances or values. I will not stop. Stopping this concept now because it's more for a brief conceptual account that I'm mentioning it, because I will focus next in a sort of a specific model about collective memory. We can discuss about the concept and theory later on if you want, but it's not my focus. And putting together memory and social identities, I would say that I'm interested in particular in the way in which social identities play a role within self-narratives. And that's the common question in these three case studies I will talk you in a minute. First, just to frame with a sort of model what I want to talk about. A couple of years ago I published a commentary to Brookmeyer's paper After the Archive in Cultural Psychology, 2010, where I was pushed by the editor to draw a model, which is this. I will not go into details now, just a brief explanation of what's relevant for it here. And let's start by what's at the center there. Construction of an attitude towards the way the event is represented. I was doing this model to talk about how psychological and social processes are intertwined, in particular in remembering socially relevant past events, right? So what I'm suggesting is that the construction of an attitude, an affective or evaluative orientation towards an event is dynamically related to a more cognitive construction of knowledge structures about these past events, and also the construction of a sort of a social map of how positions are distributed in terms, again, of these evaluative positions and cognitive representations. So, in a way, to have a position, it's something that involves three aspects. Like the process, which is not just an event, the process of building up an affective and evaluative attitude, along with the construction of knowledge structures or representations, you know, adjusting representations in the view of evaluations and the other way around, but also adjusting them both in terms of who is assumed to be feeling and believing this kind of thing about this fact. So mapping the social position we're building. And this dynamism among the three aspects is from what I think we can say that a claim about the past can emerge from the dynamic, the non-stopping dynamic of these three processes. But then, whenever we express a truth claim about the past, then we are addressing somebody or a group, and we are taking a position towards them, and we are typically incorporating counter positions in our positioning, and we expect as well responses from our positioning, which modify in a way our knowledge construction and also the building of this social map of positioning. That was what I thought like 3 years ago, right? And based on previous research, incorporating in a way this dialogical approach. But still, my question now is, how are social identities involved in this dynamic, right? And in particular, I think social identities have a very important role in this construction of a map of social positions, as well as the recognition of the counter-positioning movements anticipated or perceived after our positioning, ideological positioning, right? So, to come back to this, like political phenomenon of identity and memory in the case of political refugees, which is I would say, my empirical scenario, where I'm asking about the relationship between memory and identity. Why there? Well, because first of all, social identity theories in general show that the self is embedded in the social, right? So that in order to feel oneself and conceive oneself in a context, we are not just referring to individual aspects, you know, but also to collective social processes. And the question is how then these social processes or social categories are involved as self-relevant information in meaning-making practices, such as self-narratives. However, refugees, especially the refugees I know from my experience in England, Chilean refugees arriving at England during the 70s after the military coup, they the first experience is that they have sort of a divided identity, multiple identities, but also divided in terms of non-reconciliation among possible identities. And there are different strategies that mixing identities, hyphenating identities, or different forms of hybrid identities that have been researched and described based on this diagnosis about the division of identity in refugees. But also, what I found is that there is a very strong feeling of frustration and melancholy in the Chilean refugees I know, who, after decades, already renounced the idea of coming back to Chile. Some of them came to Chile several times and realized that this is not Chile or their Chile, or it's not anymore a place with which, I don't know, they feel identified, right? So in a way, they have no hope for recovering identity. So that's why I'm focusing on this phenomenon of refugees, because I think it's a challenge to this link of memory and identity. Now we'll sorry about that. So I will refer, not describe here in detail, three cases, three studies in a way that have been reconstructing, because they didn't start as a research study, as research. It started as a friendship, in a way. Hector, one of these guys, well, he's a very old man. I started working with him as a friend, as a young friend, with the disposition to hear his life stories. But then we started a more systematic work. Then Sergio Contreras was one of my very close friends since I met him. And the last time I visited Sergio, Hector, and also the second Sergio there, Bustamante, was July this year, and I met separately each of them to basically to put forward in our discussion and in our relationship and their accounts, they're telling to me the problem of social class. Because during the last couple of years, I've been wondering what's the meaning or the role social class has in the experience of these three guys who because they talk about social class, right? But in different ways. So what I was doing with them was not a real interview about class. I was following them or joining them in cultural production projects. What I'm studying is how social class is meaningfully referred to in the practice of producing a cultural object in these three cases, right? First of all, Hector has been working with my help in a life history of his own. That's the cultural object or production, right? And I'm described, el escriba, no? And there are some aspect of this story that most of you have heard before, so I will skip them all. I will just say that according to some more specific analysis, discourse analysis, carried out by, there is an assistant that was here in the first block but not now. There is a very interesting way in which Hector engaged with social class. He was a political leader of business from the 1950 to 73. And he takes his extremely bad experience of exile as a way of, so to say, paying the fact that he and his group was defeated. So it's in a way just that he was tortured, exiled, and so to say, damaged in his identity and his memory. That's one very, very striking aspect of his discourse. A second point, just three aspects I will stress. The second point is that all his failures and pains in life, previous of the military coup of 1973 and also after that, acquire a particular meaning as ways of contributing to an encompassing and overarching social process called, well, class struggle in his terms, right? So his life, in a way, in this exercise of making a life history, he builds the character of his own, narratively, as a subject that has no complete meaning in itself, but the meaning of his life is dependent on a larger and open process that couldn't be closed, that is class struggle. So in that way, he manages to connect his limited individual life, his his individual life with a sort of a social identity that cannot be viewed simply as as an individual life or as a collection of individual lives. It's like a political project. Class struggle is not something that happens. It's something that it's part of a hope, right? In the discourse. Finally, Hector addresses his life history to the young generations who has, because of the dictatorship and then the post-dictatorship period till today, has been neglected to develop consciousness and knowledge about class struggle. So he's bringing his stories to young people in order for them to recover class consciousness, right? Second case, Sergio was involved in producing a documentary of his own, part of his own life, produced and directed by Giannis Kolosis from Greece. The documentary already was finished, and there are a couple of prizes the European context won by this documentary. In the case of Sergio, I will show a little bit of this video, but to summarize, Sergio lived in Punta Arenas. He was 17 at the time of the military coup. For ideological reasons, he decided to quit, so he has been self-exiled, received as a refugee in England late in 1978, I think, and he has been like with a guitar traveling around Latin America and Europe before that, singing songs of freedom. And the documentary that was produced about 3 years ago, it was filmed 2010, so yeah, 6 years ago. And that film depicts in real time and in real life the first and only return or visit to Chile by this guy. He never went back and never had any contact with his family until he came back with a camera and with this Greek guy. So the story has to do with this reconnection, this magical reconnection with his, so to say, forgotten life. Before stressing a couple of aspects of it, let me see if it works for you to have a flavor. Let's see if it sounds. We didn't find any. ¿Dónde se puede ¿Dónde se? Ahí,
a la derecha.
Ahí.
No, eso.
Cuidado. Okay, let me stop it now because of we need the time for discussion. Let me just draw your attention to the way in which the documentary started, giving Sergio giving a particular interpretation of a very well-known song, right? Te recuerdo, Amanda. So framing his own life in terms of sort of a class difference, right? He was the son of the maid and the patron. Now, in particular, this documentary basically transmits a very human and personal view of life and experience from the point of view of those who have been excluded, repressed, or even just not privileged. So it's always a discourse that refers sometimes only to class, but always is referring to liberation or liberation from the dominant society, right? And usually he's in this documentary. The whole message has to do with the very title of the documentary, which says "Un cóndor," no? The idea of freedom, right? Which is very different from Hector's discourse. Third, Sergio II, or Sergio Bustamante this time. I'm using real names. I asked them, these are all cultural productions that have been in a way published or about to be published in a way, I don't know, it's, they feel like their name must be there. So I would be hiding something against their will if I would be using pseudonyms in these cases. Sergio Bustamante was a plastic artist who in the 80s in Sheffield, within the workers' movement at that time, painted with his brother a large mural inspired in Pablo Neruda's Canto General. The mural was a way of incorporating a Latin American view of humanity and of social class and of class struggle and of history in or within the worker, the workers' issues at that time in England, basically unemployment and the transformation of economy, right, as you probably know. So let me just look at this mural without stopping in the details that... Sorry about that. Oh, it's correct.
Arriba.
¿Cómo elimina
Arriba, a la derecha.
Las dos flechas.
Yes.
I didn't use Windows, that's why. Well, this has 5 meters wide and about almost 2 height, right? And it represents, following, as I said, Pablo Neruda's poem, it represents the history of humanity starting about there, representing basically the Latin America first like encounters with Europe. So the origin is the origin of you know colonization, right? And ending up, no, sorry, the temporal aspect of it is very complex. It's not that easy. So this is the past to the left side, and the present is at the right side. The present is like mirroring the past, but with different kind of, for instance, political leaders or instruments of repression. And then at the center we have the future. Now, that I would like to focus on this now. No, I mean, I've been talking with this guy for hours and hours about every detail of this, but I will save you that. Just look at the center. There is a child looking at the horizon, where you can find like a volcano, an explosion, farms, people, social movements, and a couple of peasants. Peasants looking at us, so to say. This is just to give you a flavor of the material I've been working on. Let me just...
What's the legend on the top?
The legend.
Yeah, I've got a translation. Yeah, and it's framed by this legend, which Pablo Neruda, well, sorry about that. Pablo Neruda finished his address when receiving the Nobel Prize in 1971 with this phrase: "Solo con ardiente paciencia conquistaremos la ciudad espléndida que dará luz, justicia y dignidad a toda la humanidad." Which is a way of again referring to an ideal future, utopia, right? In terms of the realization of this kind of identity or group, humanity. Humanity is not represented in this discourse as something that is completed now, but something that is open and awaiting for a future, right? Let me just focus on some general aspects without distinguishing the different, because there are very different approaches in these three cases. The discourse about class and the meaning of class is different, right? However, there is a common aspect that has to do with the type of positioning, and that's basically the result of the comparative analysis of these cases. Positioning has to do, as I said, with an I-you and we-they distinctions, but in particular, in these three cases, there is a very clear difference between the other, or the they, so to say, the they to whom one responds to, and the they to whom one addresses our actions. The they as an addressee is, in the three cases, the new generations. So they are talking to young people, right? these three cultural objects or creations are meant as a way of making a contact with young people. And the they to whom one is responding is in the three cases, although in different words, the impersonal exploitation practices and established powers in society. And these are very different others. It's not the same, young generations and established powers. And they are both in the place of the they, not the we, right? So the we is related at the same times with these two others, right? And the we is in the three cases, social class, although they do not use that word. These three guys do not use this word exactly in the same way. Social class, however, beyond the differences of meaning use in these cases, and this is the reflection I'm getting about social class from these cases, cannot be thought of in terms of a fixed category. For instance, in terms of structural properties of social groups, but a moving and open process, because it's an historical. I mean, social class has many different meanings. Okay, and when we study sometimes social class in terms of socioeconomic access, that's all right. I'm saying that in these cases, one can observe a meaning of class that is interesting for a social, psychological dynamics of identity and memory, and they become relevant not as fixed categories, but as a reference to an open social process. Then they're not class is not referring to a particular social group, but a value, social value, as I said at the beginning, a principle, an ideal. Class works, the notion of class works in these three cases as a frame, as a frame for remembering, as a frame for action, in general as a frame for meaning making, particularly in memory processes or biographical memory and narrative practices, and also in self processes that has to do with identity. Finally, I will say that ideology. I mean, ideology is not that something that is like a uniform discourse pertaining to a social group, and in particular in this case, there is no specific ideology or discourse associated with this notion of this experience of social class. Rather, social class serve as a self-relevant source of discourses or positioning movements to be individuated and appropriated creatively in different ways. So I can find in these three cases different discourses, different contexts, although it's the same pattern of dialogue or dialogical properties. It's the same kind of they, the same kind of we, but the content is something, and the specific, even emotional tone of discourse is something that has to do with individuation and appropriation in action, in context. Well, this is the final point, not the other. And as a frame for memory and self processes, social class can be viewed as as a common references of different narratives. Narratives that are rhetorically or, so to say, ideologically produced, but all referring to a kind of a common shared ideal. I'm saying this because the three cases are very different in terms of their political perspectives. They are of different political groups, and the three of them are marginalized within the Sheffield Chilean community because they're political discourses, but at the same time they are like in opposition towards the others. I mean, the discourse of Sergio Bustamante was strongly criticized by Hector, for instance, in several interviews. So they really fight. There are different narratives, but there's like a common reference that enables them probably to, so to say, to establish a contact or a dialogue, and that's social class in these studies. Now that's some references, but thank you. That's it.
Okay, great. Thank you, Andrés. And we have palabra.
Voy a hacerlo en español.
Sí, por supuesto.
Una pregunta como a propósito de la manera en que uno puede presentar datos de análisis de discurso. Y es que, porque creo que esta es una manera como de identificar en un mapa diferentes cuestiones. Y me preguntaba por otras maneras de poder presentar los datos de manera tal que no solo hagamos referencia a ellos, sino quizás de producir la experiencia que ese dibujo ha provocado. No sé si se entiende la diferencia. Como que me surge la pregunta siempre cuando me enfrento a tener que dar cuenta de resultados de análisis de discurso, el modo de presentarlo y la variedad de posibilidades que ese tipo de análisis puede presentar a la hora de ser presentado.
Can I quickly translate just to make sure? The question is about the ways to present data from discourse analysis, and the question by Enzo is how to, beyond referring to the data, how to convey or communicate what's produced by the, ¿cómo fraseaste cómo la experiencia, cómo se produce la experiencia?
La experiencia de eso, de que cuando uno mapea como lo...
Okay, yeah, beyond mapping, how you would produce or reproduce the experience in a way that has been conveyed.
Yeah, when you say mapping, what do you mean? Because in this case, I mean, discourse are three pieces. One is documentary, the other one is a mural. That's the discursive material, right? And the other one is interviews and material, right? But
no trato de decir que eso es el mapeo, sino que en la mayoría de las veces cuando me enfrento a la producción de datos de eso y cuando uno ve como las otras personas quieren dar cuenta de sus análisis, que creo que este es justamente algo que está como que no es del todo así. Presentan como, por ejemplo, cuando obligan a hacer un mapa, así como a presentarlo, lo dibujan. Y ponen cuestiones y un mono aquí y un mono acá que como que conversan y hacen cosas.
Yeah, they call it the model.
Claro, el modelo, eso. En cambio, claro, aquí hay otro tipo de materialidades que están presentes.
I tried to present model at the beginning, but yeah. Well, I think, yeah, that's very interesting. I mean, the way in which you present your data or your analysis. And in this case, I would say I didn't make an effort to present the analysis, just so to say some conclusions and reflections of the analysis, but the analysis itself was, I mean, I kept it in. But I would, I mean, for me it's a very challenging issue, and what I would do in the line you're saying is to take the way in which I try to, so to say, to frame the phase that is called the data collection instead of data presentation or whatever. And the way in which I frame this, in these studies but also in a couple of other studies, is to follow the subject in her activity, especially in a creative activity. So I analyze basically the reasons, the decisions, the criteria, the movements of going forward and backwards, and in that way I think the proper way to present the analysis of that material, of an ongoing activity that I'm following, is basically to reproduce crucial parts of that process in order for others to be involved with the material. So actually in the case of these studies, I never thought really of writing a paper. I have been thinking of setting a sort of intervention or no installation. An installation. Actually, yeah.
Okay. Otras preguntas, the questions or comments? Christian?
I don't know. I don't know. 15, 20 years ago, we were talking about and even writing about the idea of you remember a collective identity as an horizon, and the possibility of a collective identity that doesn't in which different individuals doesn't share anything in common, but refer to a common question. You know what I'm talking about.
I don't remember exactly that conversation. Yeah, I know what you mean. Yeah.
Huachos y huérfanos. Do you remember?
Oh yeah, we wrote the paper.
In that text.
Yeah.
But I would like to reflect or to follow your idea. In some point of the presentation, you said that was the way I was thinking 3 years ago. So I would like to go
20 years ago.
20 years ago. But in order to present I would like to if you can stress the differences, because it's not just I think a matter of terminology. I mean, we were talking about identity, and you conclude with the idea of a reference to an ideology. You know, and so it's really a matter of different objects, or which is the development from these 2 points in your own reflection about the subjects.
Do you see any difference?
Yeah, because it's the reference. I mean, there is an analogy that's which strikes me. You know, something that is different, that refers to something, and it enables the different positions or even subjects to share, even if doesn't share anything positive.
Yeah, but that's why I'm asking, because I completely forgot about that old paper. And now I see that it's what I'm thinking now. I mean, the last point, that, or the last 2 or 3 points, I don't remember, that social class plays the role of an open reference that first of all includes different narratives and different ideological stances. Even though the 3 of these guys would point at the extreme left, and that's homogeneous, if you explore why, under what condition, towards what other, in what context, with what content, it's different, right? So in a way, these 3 guys do not talk to each other because they don't share their political view. They were from different bands within the Unidad Popular, blaming each other, you know. But they have this common reference to a future. It's not an actual reality. What I grasp, that is the notion of social class in these cases. So in that way, it's very similar to what we conceived years ago in abstract terms, because we were talking about the possibility of a identity formations that are not centered by a sort of a model in relation to which there are differences or I don't know, marginal positions or defective. Right? So in a way, I think that this is a concrete social class, as I say it, in these discourses, or in these cases, work in that way precisely.
Just trying to make the 2 presentation dialogue a little bit. What could be the gain or the loss in taking a positioning stand versus a classic social psychology, identity theory perspective, especially in the case of political violence and perhaps polarization of political views, yes, and what is the role of perhaps ambivalence or conflicting identifications, and in your view, what should it be in the study, in the research of identity and political psychology?
Well, yeah, that's a huge question, and so there are several aspects of it, and I think one important part of your question has to do with probably, to put it in simple terms, to discuss the notion of identity as something that is given or existing, or even existing in a fixed way. Instead, I think it's very important to think of identity and identities as something that has to do with human action and the performative aspects of human action. It has to do with something to be done rather than to be perceived. Or so, in a way, I would say the classical social identity theory is very limited, and we have a lot of criticisms accumulated through 3 or 4 decades. However, I think there is a basic, very reasonable notion in social identity theory, even the classical form, that has to do with the fact that not as a fixed thing, but as a process, self, as a process of making self, is a process embedded in, anidada, and other processes, right? Collective or social or historical processes. So that the way in which you construct yourself, you feel yourself, or you present yourself, in a way takes into account, in a dynamic way and a contextualized way, different aspects of what's beyond yourself, right? And I think that's a crucial aspect of social identity theories in general.
Mhm.
I don't know, I took just one part or aspect. So.
Do you want to react to that question as well, Philip? Or?
I agree.
Well,
But I think that, I think social identity theory went in a kind of, I think maybe too cognitive of a direction. You kind of alluded to that. So I think anything that brings back in emotion, affect, and language, which is basically exactly what both of our perspectives are trying to bring back in, I think is really valuable and important. And so I think it doesn't kind of have to be either or. I like this kind of integration of bringing in dialogical self theory and positioning and social identity theory together, in dialogue with each other, and thinking about data a little differently too than the self-categorization theorists maybe do. So.
The other comment that I would make, I mean, it's a very short comment, but coming from a more traditional training in psychology, is the way your research and yours and other research in social cognition illustrates the intrinsically political nature of identity. I think for psychology being a discipline that has, I mean, at least some subfields of psychology that you really have to make a case of what is political about psychology. I mean, I think identity illustrates that it's, I mean, you cannot separate the political aspects in the broader sense, in terms that you take positions, that you're always part of groups that hold different power relations. So I think that's also okay.
Yeah, but let me just counter comment you. Yeah, and because I see from your comment another aspect as well, that is not only identity has a political dimension or core, I don't know, but it's also that social identities and collective memory has a psychological effects. So, for instance, I think in these three cases of refugees, and I'm studying refugees because I think it's a critical condition for challenging the assumed relationship between idea or assumed notions of identity and memory. But what I think is that, in particular, social class is a discursive and memory reference that make these guys live better their lives. So it has also psychological. I would stress the psychological effects of these ideological aspects. Yes. Yeah.
Bueno, estamos pasados del tiempo bastante. Les agradecemos a todos su presencia. Todos se anotaron para que el grupo siga vivo y se informen de las actividades. Le agradecemos una vez más a todos ustedes, a nuestros presentadores por las interesantes presentaciones. Muchas gracias.